So we're just going to have a conversation with you, really a reflection of the type of questions that the students have been asking you and us calling on you to provide us with a summation. So Meera, you're in the middle, so I'll start with you as a clinical academic. So what were the type of questions the students were asking you?
So I think one of the recurring things was around managing time, because patients tend to do things when you're trying to do research, and research timetables sometimes clash when you've got a huge clinical volume, and I think a lot of the discussion was to be flexible and actually not set the pace, but actually just focus on getting whatever you can do done from a quality perspective, and it sort of will pan out. And some weeks you'll have very busy clinical load, and other weeks you'll have a little bit more time. But if you just focus on the next jigsaw bit and the quality, so I think that was one thing that we talked about. I think the other thing was around researchers and clinicians. Some people were clinicians getting into research, and others were researchers getting into clinical areas, and actually having opportunities to have corridor conversations, understanding the policy in your clinical area, what the sort of directions were, so you could position your research and communicate that well, was the other sort of aspect that I think came up a few times.
Okay, so it sounds like the students who came to your table had lots of practical advice. So Phoebe, what about from your perspective in
had
academia?
a huge range of questions, but I guess the one which came up was, how do you find a mentor? And I think some people are really overwhelmed about how do you approach a mentor, but you guys have about 10 in front of you today, and it doesn't need to be like your first date. Oh, will you date me tonight? It can be just you build a relationship over time, and you can start to trust each other. And I think the point I made was that you need different mentors for different parts of what you're doing. An example I gave was when I started to do political advocacy, and I'd never spoken to a politician. So I have two politician mentors, and that helped me in communicating to politicians. And so finding the right mentor for where you are and where you need help, and identifying your strengths and your weaknesses and aligning with mentors was my message. The other thing was about, grant writing, and my point there is that you fail, but keep trying. And how you connect with networks to help you and build your capacity in that space.
Orin.
Thank you. As Laura said, a lot of the questions were about how you actually make the transition from academia into industry and what kind of roles are available. So I've been referring a lot of the students that I spoke to a website run by the Association for the Pharmaceutical Industry in the UK, and it's careers.abpi.co.uk. And they've got a lot of information about different careers in the pharmaceutical industry, so it's quite a good website to have a look at to understand those roles. The other pathway that we did discuss at this table with various students was actually taking a role in government and then moving from government into industry. So working for the health regulator, the TGA for instance, or some of the other regulators, NICNAS for the chemicals regulator, APVMA, etc. So that's another route that people take into the pharmaceutical industry when they're looking at those careers.
Fantastic. Thanks for painting those different pathways. And I'll come to you, Michelle.
Right, so I got asked several questions about work-life balance, and specifically when's the best time to have children. And my answer is that there's no right time and there's no wrong time to have children. When you want to have children, because you just got to work around it. They all need looking after, and you're going to have to find, some people, you do it before your PhD, after your PhD, after your third postdoc. You will know when you and your partner are ready to have kids, or you on your own are ready to have kids, and just do it and then work. This has all been done before. Women have always been finding childcare solutions for many, many decades and centuries before that. And so speak to other people and don't invent solutions for yourselves. Talk to people who've been down that path before. I got lots of questions about, the funding is so tight now. Is this for when I get out of academia or go into industry or go into government or go into all of the others? And my response to that is, okay, so the funding is at 15% now. It was at the best, it was at 25%. You never had any guarantees of getting any funding. If you love medical research, go for it. And, get yourself in a good group and be sure that you can be as productive as possible, but don't walk away from it because you're nervous about the funding climate. That's the game we're in, whether you're in any of these areas. No one's going to write you a job for life, not in medicine, not in anything. You've got to work hard and be very productive. I got some very interesting questions about I want to be more at the bench or I want to be less at the bench. And again, the answer is it's all there. You can find it all. You just find what works for you and choose. And the last one was about changing career directions, and I've reflected to several people today. I think it was Karen who said mine isn't the normal path. And I think what we've heard today is that there is no such thing as a normal path in this world that we're in. And every person's story in medical research or after a PhD is different from everybody else's, and everyone has their own forks in the road. And you follow them, and if you take the wrong fork, it's not the end of the world. You find the next step that takes you somewhere that you want to. And embrace excitement and change and opportunity and risk and explore what's out there, because otherwise you won't find what's perfect for you.
Thank you. Look, a number of things I think that have already been said, but particularly there was a question at the table a number of times around when to move, if you're deciding to move from academia, when to move. And that is a very individual thing, but I did also say that, as somebody who has reviewed many CVs over the years for people applying for jobs, don't expect to spend 5 to 10 years as a researcher without gaining experience in other areas and then think that it'll be easy to move into a role in policy or government. So I think Cleola's told you that is possible in some groups, but try to get a broader experience would be my advice. And tailoring your CV, really important. Think about the job you're applying for and where you're heading and the kinds of things that would be expected. Don't put everything in your CV. Don't list every single publication you ever wrote because it may not be relevant for what you're looking for. And I think I also heard people asking about how do you find out roles, how do you know what the organisations are. Start to do yourself a bit of an environmental scan. Have a look at organisations across the country, internationally. Start to think about where there might be some opportunities for you. And I just was reflecting, listening to the last group. There's nothing better than assessing grants and peer reviewing publications to learn what not to do. I would advise it for anybody who's writing grants. And the job security, yes, things change in different places, but in places like the public service, you can have fairly permanent roles for a long time if that's what you choose. And to also mention that some jobs do not get advertised outside the public service. So if you have a foot in the door, you will then see roles that you will not see publicly advertised. But I think the last message is, yes, I think as Michelle said, take a risk.
Great, thank you. So Karen, I'll get you to speak from academia.
Thanks, Jane. So I actually got a lot of questions about how do I transition from my last year writing up my PhD into an academic track pathway, for those of you that are interested in doing that. And it made me reflect, because I think there are really two big challenges here. One is, for those that are in your last year, you're experiencing major write-up pain, right? You're experiencing the thrill, the angst, the difficulties of actually sitting down and writing this huge document, which is your thesis. And it's very hard to come out of that and say, well, actually, this is my last year. I need to be thinking about what's next. But I really encourage you to try and do that, because whatever your path in life, getting a handle on it sooner rather than later will always help you. Giving yourself that year or so, or even 6 months, whatever time you've got now, to actually start thinking and approaching people about your postdoctoral or other career is really, really important. I think the second challenge that came out in some of the discussions that I had with many of you is that, as researchers, actually a lot of us don't like to put ourselves forward. So the thought of proactively contacting groups, contacting research leaders, asking for advice, asking if there are any opportunities, was actually really hard for many of you to get your heads around, and I totally understand and empathise with that myself. But I think the thing to keep in mind there, if you really want to do it, you will know who the researchers in Australia are, or overseas, that you might want to work with. And some of the best researchers in my team actually wrote me a letter and said, here's why I want to work with you, here's why my research really will lead directly into contributing in your team. And it was really, really targeted, because unfortunately senior researchers, and I'm sure I'm not speaking for myself, receive many, many emails all the time. But if you get a sort of a rote email that's clearly just being sent to 100 other researchers, that's really not going to take you anywhere. You're so much better off thinking quite carefully, who do I really want to work with? And as has been already mentioned, not all jobs are advertised, or you might just be that little bit ahead of the cycle. You might get someone thinking, oh yeah, I've got a bit of money left in that grant, maybe I could use another person. And so it's just really worth a try. So don't leave it till you submit your thesis. That's my big message. And I suppose just to wrap up, with all of this, even if you don't get that immediate postdoc job, I didn't myself, a sideways step is fine. You will always learn something. Even if you go back into research, you will always be able to take something back into your research career. So don't give up, keep going.
Fantastic advice, thank you. So Paul, what were the questions you were being asked?
I can't remember. My memory is terrible. Besides, I was talking too much and I didn't allow time for questions. I think we discussed a lot about opportunities within pharma industry, and I was just encouraging people to be flexible and to try and gain skills, and to not forget about people, because I think if you develop people skills, you will have many more opportunities than if you didn't have the people skills. I got one question about work-life balance, and I don't know what that is. Someone will have to explain that to me. But life is messy, and so I think you just take the opportunities you can. I did give an example of one lab-based medicinal chemist, PhD graduate, who decided she didn't want to do that kind of work, didn't want to pursue a postdoc, so she volunteered for clinical trials, learnt a lot about it in our trials unit, and after about 6 months got a job as a trials coordinator, and then after about another year got a job with a clinical research organisation, and now she's overseas and running a multi-million-dollar company. Well, actually maybe not, but maybe not the last bit, but she's doing very well within a very short time. So you can move sideways, you develop skills, and you don't have to stick with what necessarily you started out with.
Thank you. So Sharon, your questions, the questions you were being asked.
Okay, I won't repeat some of the ones that we've already had. There was a couple of things that did come out. For those of you that want a clinical research background, one of the things that are available are, when you leave, finish your PhD, are TRIP fellowships. Don't forget them, that they allow you to do research, funded research part-time, and the other half of your role is doing clinical research. That certainly, I've got several students now that have gone on to do that. They're quite good. The other thing that we talked about was looking at your CV, even for those of you that are at the beginning of your career in your PhDs, and thinking where you might want to go. It's an opportunity to gain experience. I've sat on review panels for fellowships through the National Breast Cancer Foundation, for example, my colleagues done NHMRC, and we have similar experiences. It's not just the science, that yes, you have to have a good track record. It is an extremely competitive field out there now. What else are you doing? Where is your leadership? So I have actually volunteered students to you guys. You will be having grants come up that you have volunteers here to give experience to doing grant reviews. They can add that to their CVs. Look for opportunities where you can add leadership roles to your CV as you go through your PhDs. Any of the cancer organizations would love you to volunteer to help with them. These all seriously come into play when we're looking at making that final decision. You're splitting hairs. This person's done these other things. Yep, the fellowship goes to them. And then the other thing was about security. So if you go into the standard 40-40-20 academic role, there's still opportunity for fellowships. I certainly this year have 3 staff members that are going on NHMRC fellowships for 5 years. They will then come back. They have a continuing role in the faculty, and it would be worth having conversations with, if you want the academic role, to have that conversation once you're established. Can I use my CV now to try for this? They put someone on short-term contract in your role while you have your fellowship, and then you come back after.